My parents disowned me for chasing my dreams. You'll come crawling back. But when I bought their house, they were speechless. Real estate, my brother snorted, setting his fork down with an exaggerated roll of his eyes. That's your big rebellion, Megan. You think flipping houses is going to replace a billion-dollar empire? My father didn't laugh. He just stared at me unblinking, as if I were an insect beneath his shoe. And then he said the words that would burn themselves into my memory forever. You'll come crawling back, and when you do, we won't open the door. The weight of his voice pressed down on the dining room final and absolute. The chandelier above cast sharp reflections on the polished mahogany table, its pristine surface a mirror of the carefully curated world my parents had built one where power, status, and control dictated every move, and I was disrupting it. I gripped my fork tighter, feeling my pulse hammer against my skin. My mother hadn't even looked up, her wine glass delicately poised. Between her fingers, she preferred to watch these moments unfold from a distance, like an artist admiring the chaos of her own design. I'm not asking for your approval, I said, my voice firm. I'm telling you my decision. My father exhaled, slow and controlled, before setting down his napkin beside his plate across from me. Nathan leaned back, enjoying the spectacle. He had always played the role of the obedient son, the heir who would uphold the family's legacy. My refusal to do the same was nothing more than an amusing distraction to him. Let me explain something to you, Megan, my father said, his voice like iron, wrapped in velvet. You are not built for survival. You grew up with privilege, with security. You have no idea what it means to fight for something. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. He wasn't entirely wrong. I had grown up surrounded by wealth, shielded from hardship, but that didn't mean I was incapable. It didn't mean I wasn't willing to learn to struggle to build something of my own. I'm not afraid of starting from nothing, I said. You should be. He leaned forward, his gaze razor sharp. Because that's exactly what you'll have. No trust fund, no inheritance, no connections. You want to play entrepreneur, fine, but don't expect to carry our name with you. A knot formed in my stomach. This was more than just a refusal of support. This was a severance, a declaration that I no longer belonged in this family. For a brief moment, I hesitated. It would be so easy to step back into their carefully constructed world, to nod and accept the future they had laid out for me, a high-ranking position in the family business, a life of comfort, stability, and unchallenged luxury. But at what cost? A life where every decision was made for me, where my worth was measured by my compliance. I had made my choice. Then I guess this is it, I said. Pushing back my chair, the sound of it scraping against the marble floor felt deafening. I stood my legs steady despite the storm raging inside me. I hope for your sake that, you never need me the way you think I'll need you. My father's expression didn't change. My mother sipped her wine. Nathan chuckled under his breath, and just like that, I was no longer their daughter, leaving it all behind. I packed in silence. My childhood room, once filled with traces of my life books stacked on shelves, framed photographs of vacations, long past, felt foreign now. The walls were too pristine, too perfect, as if they had never really belonged to me in the first place. A knock at the door. I turned to see Nathan leaning against the frame, arms crossed, expression unreadable. You're actually doing this, he said, more amused than concerned. I don't see another option. He exhaled. Stepping inside. You're making a mistake, Megan. I zipped up my suitcase. We'll see about that. Nathan shook his head. You think you're different, that you're some outlier who can succeed without the family name? You'll burn out within a year. Then what, come crawling back there? Was again that phrase. I met his gaze. I won't crawl, Nathan. That's the difference between me and the rest of you. I'll build something on my own, and when I make it, you'll all have to watch. He smirked, stepping back. Good luck with that. And then he was gone. The first steps into the unknown. The air outside was crisp, the night stretching endlessly before me. As I walked toward my car, the house loomed behind me, its grand columns and sprawling estate bathed in golden light, a monument to everything I was leaving behind. I hesitated for only a second before opening the door and stepping inside. The engine hummed to life, a quiet reminder that this was the start of something new, something uncertain, something terrifying. I drove away without looking back, the reality of being alone. The first night was the hardest. The hotel room was small, impersonal, nothing like the luxury I had been accustomed to. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, my mind buzzing with everything that had happened. I was really on my own, no money, no safety net, no family. Fear crept in. But I pushed it down. This was what I had chosen, and if I wanted to prove them wrong, I couldn't afford to break. I reached for my phone and pulled up the real estate listings I had been studying for weeks. I had done my research, mapped out the market, planned my first move. I would start small, a single investment, a property. I could flip something manageable but with potential. I had nothing to lose and everything to prove. I took a deep breath and dialed the number of the first seller on my list. A groggy voice answered on the other end. "Hello, hi. I'm interested in the property you have listed. I'd like to schedule a viewing." Silence. Then a brief pause. "All right, tomorrow at noon. That works, thank you." I hung up and stared at my reflection in the mirror. This was it, the first move in a long, uphill battle, but no matter how hard it got, no matter how many times I failed, I would never crawl back. They had underestimated me, and one day they would see exactly what kind of mistake that was. I stared at my reflection in the hotel mirror. The person looking back at me was the same, yet different. There was no safety net beneath me anymore, no cushion life waiting. If I failed, this was it. Either I built something or I sang in the first property. Viewing was in a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The house was nothing more than a neglected structure with peeling paint, a sagging roof, and a front yard swallowed by weeds. But I saw something else, a starting point. The real estate agent barely acknowledged me. He glanced at my clothes, my lack of a business suit, and his polite demeanor barely masked his doubt. "Time investor?" He asked, the skepticism in his voice evident. I nodded, but not new. "To hard work." I ran my fingers along the cracked wooden door frame, absorbing every imperfection. I didn't have much money, but I had enough for this. It was a risk. Everything in me screamed to hesitate, to reconsider. My father's voice echoed in my mind. "You'll never survive." Without us, I signed the papers that afternoon, the moment the keys hit my palm. Reality set in. I had just spent nearly everything I had. There was no backup plan, no one to bail me out. I arrived at the property with nothing but a tool set, a bucket of paint and determination. The first night I slept on the floor, surrounded by dust and uncertainty. The air smelled of mildew and old wood, and every creak of the house felt like a reminder of what was at stake at dawn. I started working days, bled into nights as I scraped, hammered, and painted. I learned by doing, watching videos, reading manuals, making mistakes, and fixing them. My hands blistered, my muscles ached. But the house began to transform. It wasn't just about flipping a property anymore. It was about proving I belonged here. I lived off canned food and gas station coffee. Every penny accounted for. I bartered when I could, negotiated with contractors, when I couldn't do something myself. There were moments of doubt, times when exhaustion crept in and I questioned everything. Then came the first break. A local buyer looking for rental properties took interest in the house. The offer was modest but profitable enough for a return. I wanted to negotiate, push for more, but my gut told me to take it. I walked out of that deal with my first real profit. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy my next property, and the next. Each deal got bigger, each risk more calculated. I adapted. I learned how to read markets, anticipate trends, build connections. What started as a desperate gamble turned into a relentless pursuit. I flipped properties faster, turned failures into lessons, and refused to let setbacks slow me down. Contractors who once ignored me started taking me seriously. Banks that once hesitated to lend me money now returned my calls. I reinvested everything, no luxuries, no indulgences, just relentless forward momentum. I didn't crawl, I climbed. Years passed. My name became known in the real estate world, not because of my family, but because of what I built from nothing. I didn't just invest in properties. I owned entire streets, apartment buildings, commercial spaces, high-end estates. I had done what my father swore I never could. I was a self-made woman, and then the news came. My parents, Empire was crumbling, their investments had turned against them, their allies had abandoned them, their wealth no longer. Untouchable in the house that symbolized their power, the one I was cast out of, was now for sale. A slow smile formed as I read the listing. I had spent years working toward success. Now it was time for something else, justice. The moment I saw the listing, I knew the mansion that had once been my prison. The house where I had been disowned was now up for sale. I stared at the screen, barely blinking. The grand estate, the symbol of my family's power and legacy, was no longer untouchable. The empire my father built had started to crack, and this was proof. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just another property. This was a message from the universe. I had a decision to make. I could ignore it, walk away, let someone else claim the remnants of their fall. Bree could own it, own the house, own the moment, own the fact that I had risen from nothing while they had lost everything. The choice wasn't difficult. I made the call the next morning. Buying the mansion wasn't just about money, it was about strategy. I didn't walk in with my name on the offer. That would have been too obvious, too easy. Instead, I had one of my real estate firms make the bid, keeping my identity hidden behind layers of corporate paperwork. I didn't want them to see me coming. The bidding war was short. Their desperation was evident. What was once a property they would never have considered selling had become a burden. They couldn't afford to keep my offer just slightly lower than market value. Was accepted within days. And just like that, the house I had once been exiled from now belonged to me. The first time I walked through those doors as the owner, I expected to feel something overwhelming: triumph, anger, closure. Instead, there was only quiet satisfaction. The grandeur remained: the marble floors, the towering ceilings, the expensive artwork. But it felt hollow now, as if the very soul of the place had left with my family's downfall. I took my time stepping through the halls, running my fingers over the smooth banisters, staring at the dining table where my father had once told me I would come crawling back. I could still hear his voice in my head. "You think flipping houses is going to replace a billion-dual empire? You have no idea what it means to fight for something you'll never survive without us," and smirked. Shaking my head, they had been wrong about everything. I kept the house untouched for weeks, letting it sit as I decided what to do with it. Sell it too impersonal, too easy. Demolish it, tempting but wasteful. No, there was something far more fitting. I would let them live in it, but not as owners, as tenants. The opportunity arrived faster than expected. A few months after purchasing the property, I received an unexpected call from a familiar number: Megan. I let the phone ring for a few seconds before answering. "Megan," he said, his voice hesitant. I waited, silence stretched between us. He knew he had to know. "Listen," he continued, clearing his throat. We need to talk." I leaned back in my chair, feigning disinterest. "About what?" More hesitation, then finally, "The truth. The house," he admitted. "Mom and Dad, they're struggling. They don't have a place to go." I let the words settle. Margaret and Gerald Holloway, my parents who once held more wealth than they knew what to do with, were homeless. Nathan kept talking, but I barely listened. I was picturing them standing outside that grand mansion, the one they had ruled like a kingdom, now forced to ask for a place inside. The irony was poetic, and the decision was already made. "All right," I said finally, "I'll meet you there." The driveway felt different as I pulled in that evening, the last time I had stood. Here I had been an outcast, walking away with nothing. Now I was the one holding the keys. Nathan was already outside when I arrived, shifting awkwardly on his feet. He looked different, less sure of himself, less smug, like a man who had finally seen how fragile his world really was. When he saw me step out of my car, he exhaled in relief. "Megan, I appreciate this, really. I know things weren't good between you," and the front door swung open before he could finish. My father stepped out first, his suit slightly wrinkled, his eyes sharper than I remembered. My mother followed, a forced calmness in her demeanor, but I saw the tension in the way she gripped her purse. They weren't just surprised to see me, they were dreading it. I took my time walking up the steps, letting the silence stretch. Finally, my father spoke. "You own it." The words sounded unnatural, coming from him as if saying them out loud, made them more real. I nodded yes, more silence for the first time in my life. My father looked at me not with authority, not with dominance, but with uncertainty. He was waiting for my verdict. I turned the keys in my hand, considering my next words. Carefully, you can stay, I said finally, but not as owners, as tenants. I didn't expect gratitude and I didn't get it. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's lips parted as if she wanted to protest, but didn't dare. Nathan, to his credit, didn't say anything at all. I'll send over the lease, I continued. You pay rent like everyone else in my properties. My father exhaled sharply. Megan, this isn't, I held up a hand, cutting him off. This is what it is, take it or leave it. More silence, and then the moment I had waited years for. Gerald Holloway nodded. He accepted. I had one that night as I stood on the balcony overlooking the city. I thought about everything it had taken to get here. The years of struggle, the sacrifices, the night spent wondering if I had made the right decision, had fought. I had clawed my way up, and now I had done what they never thought possible. I hadn't. Just proven them wrong, I had. Rewritten the rules, and the best part, I hadn't destroyed them. I had simply made them face their own downfall. I smiled to myself. As the lights of the city stretched before me, tomorrow the lease agreement would be signed and my parents, once the rulers of this house, would live in it under my terms. Not as kings, but as tenants. The moment my father nodded, accepting the reality that I now own the house he once ruled, a strange silence settled over us. It wasn't a silence of peace. It was something heavier, charged with everything unsaid. Resentment, regret. Pride swallowed whole. Nathan looked between us as if expecting one of us to say something more, to bridge the chasm that had widened over the years. My mother, ever the image of a cold restraint, kept her chin high, her expression unreadable, but I saw it, the flicker of disbelief, the unwilling acceptance. This wasn't a negotiation, it wasn't a power struggle anymore. They had lost that right. I handed my father a neatly printed lease agreement, the kind I had given to hundreds of tenants before. But this one was different. This was personal. You'll pay rent on the first of each month, I said, keeping my tone even. No special treatment, no exceptions. My father took the papers, his fingers gripping the edges just a little too tightly. He skimmed through the document, his jaw clenching at the standard clauses: monthly rent, penalties for late payments, property maintenance responsibilities. My mother finally spoke. Megan. I met her gaze, daring her to finish whatever plea she was about to make. He didn't. Instead, she exhaled softly, her pride forcing her to stay silent. They didn't have a choice. They signed the moment the pen left the paper. It was done. I didn't linger. I turned, walking away without looking back, leaving them to sit with their loss in the house they no longer owned that first month, and waited not out of concern, not out of curiosity, but to see if they would break the terms of our agreement. Would they try to delay payment? Would they call? Hoping for leniency, they didn't. On the first of the month, the rent was transferred on time without a single word. The money meant nothing to me. It was never about that. It was about principle, about proof that they now lived under my terms. I watched from a distance. My father, once a man who dictated boardrooms and commanded empires, now reduced to a businessman scrambling to stay afloat. My mother, once surrounded by luxury, now quietly adjusting to a life without staff at her back, and called Nathan. No longer the heir to an untouchable empire. Now learning what it meant to live without guaranteed privilege. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. The house itself changed under my ownership. I didn't renovate it immediately. That would have been too easy, too impersonal, he said. I let time do its work. The once pristine gardens weren't tended with the same perfection. They once were. The grandeur of the house faded into something less intimidating, less imposing. It was no longer a symbol of their power. It was just another rental property, and that was the most fitting fate of all. Months passed. The first time my father called me, I didn't answer. The second time, I let it ring a little longer before rejecting it. The third time I picked up, there was no hesitation in his voice, No struggle to mask his words with authority. He had let that go, Megan, he said. And for the first time in years, there was something real in his tone. Not power, not control, just acknowledgement. I waited. I suppose I should say, you proved me wrong. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting those words settle in the way he never would have imagined, because they weren't an apology. But they were enough. I exhaled. Yeah, I did. There was no need for anything else. We both knew who had won, and this time there was no one left to deny it. Months passed. The lease agreement had been signed. Rent was paid on time. No missed payments, no late excuses. It was a business arrangement, formal, unemotional, exactly the way I wanted it, and yet something shifted. It wasn't a sudden moment of clarity. No dramatic revelation. Just a gradual change, subtle and inevitable for the first time. I saw my father not as a giant, but as a man. A man who had once stood at the top of the world and now lived within the boundaries I set for him. For the first time, I saw my mother not as an untouchable figure, but as a woman who once thrived in a life of luxury and now silently adjusted to something less. And for the first time, I saw Nathan not as my rival, but as someone caught between two worlds. He had lived as the golden child, but that gold had tarnished. Now he was just like the rest of us, trying to navigate the wreckage of what once was. They weren't invincible anymore, they were just people. I visited the house one afternoon, not to inspect, not to collect rent, just to see. Looked different now, lived in, but not the way it once had been. The air of superiority was gone. The manicured perfection, the pristine elegance it had, faded. I knocked for a long moment, though there was no answer. Then the door opened. My mother stood there, caught between surprise and caution. She looked older, not from age, but from the weight of everything they had lost. Megan, she said the name hesitant on her tongue as if she still wasn't sure where we stood. I met her gaze, seeing something I never thought I'd find in her eyes: humility. Can I come in? I asked. She nodded, stepping aside. The house felt smaller now, or maybe I had just outgrown it. My father sat in the living room, the same place he used to dictate our futures with a single sentence. Now he simply looked up, acknowledging me with a nod. I had expected resentment, defiance, maybe even bitterness. But what I saw was something else: resignation, understanding, maybe even something close to respect. Nathan sat across from him, quiet, watchful. He didn't smirk, this time, didn't make a single sarcastic remark. I took a slow breath. I wanted to talk. My father set his glass down, folding his hands. We paying the rent. I assume this isn't about that. I ignored the sharpness in his tone, not because it hurt, but because I knew it wasn't real. I'm not here as your landlord, I said. Simply silence stretched between us. Then my mother sighed. Then why are you here? I hesitated. The answer had been clear before. But now, standing in front of them, I realized I wasn't sure. Maybe I had expected some grand moment. Maybe I thought would be a final victory. A closing scene where I stood above them, triumphant. But there was no victory here, no clear ending, just reality. I leaned back against the armrest, crossing my arms. I just wanted to see how you were doing. My father scoffed, but it wasn't cruel. Just tired. You want the truth or the version that makes this easier? I raised an eyebrow. The truth. He nodded once as if he respected the answer. We're adjusting. He admitted, the money's not the same, the lifestyle's not the same. But we're still standing for a moment. I saw a glimpse of the man he used to be, not the cold businessman, not the untouchable figure of my childhood, but someone who had built something from nothing, just like I had. Good, I said simply. Nathan exhaled, shaking his head. This is weird, I chuckled. Yeah, it is, for the first time in years. We weren't speaking as enemies, just as people who had been through hell and were still finding their way back. Back that night, I stood outside the house for a long time, staring at the windows that once felt like walls around me. I had spent so long chasing success, proving them wrong, making sure I never had to crawl back, and I hadn't. But standing there, I realized something. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right. I had built something, not just wealth, not just power, but a life, the future one that had nothing to do with them. I smiled to myself, a quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. I had one, not because I had taken their house, not because they were now tenants under my terms, but because for the first time in my life, I didn't need them anymore. I turned, walking away this time. I wasn't leaving in exile. I was leaving on my own terms.